much, Anna. It's lovely to be here. Actually, anxious and excitement in equal measures. Thank you very much. And I think when I started working on this particular project, it was a couple of years ago, because Tata Communications is a massive enabler of future of work. So all through the pandemic, we've managed to build seamless builds for all our global customers across the world, right from emerging economies all the way to developed economies, enabling everyone to work from home. So this comes very, very close to somebody like me, who we believe we drink our own Kool-Aid, and especially at a forum like this. It's quite an interesting intersection. I'm a non-tech person at a tech conference, so it's very exciting times indeed. But that also tells you a little bit about where we're headed with something like this. Let me take 2 seconds to introduce myself and perhaps lay my creds to this very august audience we've got here today. I was born and raised in India, and that's a beautiful monument that also depicts what India is for those who haven't had the chance to visit India. This particular picture is quite special. It was taken almost 2 decades ago at one of the best educational institutes. It was India's largest automobile manufacturers, and perhaps one of the top 5 automobile manufacturers in the world. Those are very hallowed grounds. That's our founder, J.N. Tata, and that's me in the little blue bobbing T-shirt head there, right at the back, with our Southeast Asia counterparts. For those of you who haven't heard of the Tata Group, we're a massive conglomerate, more than 150 years old, and over $150 billion in market cap. We are complete leaders in our home market, India. But when we step out, we look at the world with a very different set of lens, and that throws us back into a challenger market. And I've now lived and worked in several countries where the Tata Group hasn't been a leader or enjoyed the privileges of being in a home market. So I understand a little bit of how to deal with challenger markets. This is where I live. I live in Singapore now, and I'm usually upside down trying to figure the world out. And very recently, I'm quite excited to share that I'm now a published author. Through the pandemic, I decided to learn how to lift. And so wrote about it in a beautiful little book where I believe gives all of us a platform to voice ourselves. There wasn't a dearth of women voices, but I think what we did need was an actual platform where we could create our own anthology of voices. And that was a little high that I collected over the last few months. Having worked and built my spurs, or earned my spurs, as they would say in the auto world, I think one of the things that I take to heart and take massive pride in was the fact that I was one of the few women management trainees on the shop floor trying to find a way out and build a more inclusive world in a micro and a macrocosm. So when I had the chance to take my little human being, that's my little human being a few years ago when she was 6 years old, to see the glass factory at Dresden, and if someone has the chance to see it, I would highly recommend it. It totally threw me. I was raised on the shop floor. I understand automobiles, I understand torque, I understand power to weight ratio, I understand building an assembly line. But when I walked in those revolving doors, I didn't know that I would be gobsmacked. They were more autonomous trays than they were people. The tools presented themselves to build a chassis. There was a monocoque body ready to be rolled off without very many people. But to my 6-year-old, it was business as usual. she didn't bat an eyelid. And that hit me so hard and reminded me of Bill Gates's quote where he famously said, "The advance of technology is based on making it fit in so that you do not notice it." And this is where we're at. We're at this massive inflection point where, unlike any other generation in the history of humankind, we're straddling empathy and automation in an extremely blended and uniquely blended way. If I were to just step back and look at the statistics, we've had several advent of the computer, advent of the internet, everything thrown in our general direction. And yet, the labor stats say that we've had a movement of 1 billion jobs since 1991. We currently stand at 3.48 billion jobs or people employed versus 2.28 billion in 1991, which some might say was the way it was meant to be. But some might argue that the industrialization was meant to do the exact opposite. And now, if I were to use this inference and see what it means to us here in the now with all things generative AI, what can we do as a collective, as a group of women, to try and advance the idea of building an inclusive society? Actually, Adam Grant pointed out that the data sets we use to train artificial intelligence are often biased, which can and potentially will lead to discriminatory outcomes. It is potentially and particularly true when it comes to minority groups. And while I detest calling all of us as part of a minority group, the fact is we are underrepresented in several data sets and disproportionately affected by biased algorithms. Now, the debate really is, do we take that on the chin and build for a future which now allows us to do so? Because we can now build that through several mediums that are accessible and have several entry points to be able to do so. This takes, and funnily enough, today has been more today and will be more so about cars and automobiles. But this brings me to the point of where we are standing today with automobiles. Look at all of us. We're looking at technology that has helped us move conversations from vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to edge and the cloud, where we're talking about intelligence at the edge, and vehicle to infrastructure. Essentially, let's look at this as connected car with, let's say, vehicle to X integration. And all of this has just gone completely or grown exponentially in the last couple of years, maybe the last 4 to 5 years. It's not so far back in our imagination. But the point really is it, or the question that begs to be asked, is it the domain of the car manufacturers or is it the domain of the technology companies? Where do we stand with this really? Do the car manufacturers come first or do the technology come first? Technology companies come first. Irrespective of who comes first, whether technology disrupted everything that we conceived as status quo. And we can debate this both ways, whether it was a social equalizer or a massive polarizer. The question that we need to ask from a future of work perspective is, what's next for all of us? Irrespective, we know that net zero carbon emissions is going to be a major priority across, again, both developed economies and emerging countries. And if I were allowed to take a little bit of leeway and make a few assumptions into what this portends, an infusion in building a cleaner and greener planet, new techs looking to upskill and build potential demand for structural transformation. That's where we will come in next. That's where our priorities will land us. That is where we're going with this. We're not looking to build out on the sidelines or on the fringe. We're going to grab this by the horns. AI horns, potentially. What are we looking at? Let's look at this. Okay, the World Economic Forum report on jobs is extremely optimistic. No Gotterdammerung there. The macro trends are bound to look bullish by investments made towards green transition, broader applications, ESG standards, and localized supply chains. And this combination of macro trends and technology adoptions is going to help us recalibrate much of the sectoral distribution of employment patterns. What we're really looking at is powering a brand new ecosystem of jobs and opportunities. That's where we're at. That's the central core of the next era of all things smart. We can try everything. We can farm our thoughts out. We can creatively ideate all by ourselves. We don't need to go to a creative agency and work for nights on media planning, building out competitive landscapes, adding value to that, creating brand Hofstedes. We can do all of that in an instance. But what that allows us to do is create a different set of rules and norms, a different playing field, regulated to decrease the potential hijacking of the goodness in a world where brands are competing to be non-mass, but en masse. But this allows for individualization, individual expression, and excellence and commercial success for several more people. But this is a moment where we can actually look at bridging the gender divide, the big digital divide where widens the gender gap, biased algorithms, data sets. But this is our moment of inspiration. What we do with it is really up to us. And where we go with it leads us to the moment of truth. The field's progress and march ahead is going to be pregnant with hope and repetition in equal measures, but its march forward quite pertinent. I think the question is, what are we going to do to ensure that we don't mess with our human potential and keep working to ensure that we're building an inclusive society for ourselves, not just for ourselves, but also because we owe it to the next generation to be able to stand there and say, here, this is a better planet for you to take on and move forward with. We haven't ruined this. This is Generation Alpha, and where possibilities are infinite. Anna, how are we doing on time? Does this work? I'll end here with the fact that we have great responsibility. I'm not going to say where that comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this thought-provoking presentation. I did really enjoyed all the animations, all the visual slides that you had, but also your passion for the topic. Here's a question from Angelina. Going back to the quote you shared about inflection point we are currently at, how can empathy be effectively incorporated into the design and implementation of automation technologies?
Angelina, that's a really good point. The question that everybody's asking is, none of these large language models or any of these generative AI models actually have inbuilt childhood trauma, have inbuilt, we're not saying that childhood trauma is a good thing, but none of the learned qualities that we've had growing up as a collective, as a shared history. Now, one can argue that it'll be a matter of time before it starts imbibing these values. But the collective is still stronger than the individual. Empathy is going to be massively overvalued. Skills, I'm going to change how I've actually phrased that. Empathy is going to be critical to how all of us look at generative AI and how we imbibe that in our world. Because without it, we're not going to be able to understand what's out there. It's going to be critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another question. How can organization balance the need for efficiency and productivity with the need for human connection and collaboration in the workplace, according to you?
I think through the pandemic, all of us realized that we needed human connection. I think that was a given. The fact that most of us worked through what is called languishing on our couches, watching or binge watching shows and serials, to trying to be, again, what is called toxic positivity, of saying, I'm brilliant, how are you doing? Really, were we all brilliant? No. Bike rides, hiking, all of that. We've done everything. I, for one, worked on a collab on a dance piece that got us close to 1 million views on YouTube. People we don't know. But the question is, did we do this without human connection? That's an imperative, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we've learned that the very, very hard way. And I don't think any of us are in any hurry to let that go.
Here's another question from Stephanie. How global warming and energy crisis will impact this model and vision? Is it included in this vision?
I think that is the biggest imperative that everybody's going to look out for. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. Everybody's worried about climate change.
Yeah.
Those ESG measures, those environmental sustainability group measures, the climate change, the net zero carbon emission measures, all of that is going to be a huge priority for organizations, economies, governments, everyone. And that's where the next set of technology and human intervention will join forces, in my opinion, at least.
Thank you. How has your international experience shaped your perspective on diversity and inclusion within the industry?
Jesus. I must not take the Lord's name in vain, I know. But I've now lived in 4 different countries, worked across several more. And I think it's so important to do that for everyone. I can't recommend it more. Not least because a cultural immersion, understanding where somebody's coming from, you can potentially do that by having virtual teams and get, working through different things, but you'll never be able to know that unless you live in that moment, in that country, and breathe that culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It cannot be just, kind of sensed if you're not present and you're not there and you're not experienced.
And I think it's, and I learned to speak Thai and read and write Thai when I lived in Thailand. I don't think I would have done that otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another question. We have so many questions, but this is great that we have such an interactive session. What were some of the unique challenges you faced being one of the few women in the automobile industry?
You name it, I've had it. But in all fairness, I've also learned to say, I'm sorry, I have an idea, please listen. And
I love this.
And I remember I just say, I've become so terrible at saying, you're not taking no for an answer. I just raised my hand and said, sorry, you've got to listen. You've got to listen.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just the fact that you'd say it, but you need mentors, you need sponsors, and you need allies. We cannot do this alone.
Yeah.
You've got to have male allies because they are the people in the room. And I remember this one incident. I was the only girl at a customer mining program, and we were presenting the facts, and we were presenting the facts to the vice chairman. We were sat there for about 30 minutes, and then he looked at me, and I was also the new, the new management trainee in the house. He looked at me and said, what do you think? Everybody in the room balked, and they were like, wait, what? Don't say a what? You don't know what we're talking about. Please bear in mind, I was the one who went and visited 10 geographies. I was the one who sat and data mined and sat and stared at those Excel sheets. And everyone in the room stared at me. And I said, I'm going to be honest and candid. And here's my take on all of this. he looked at me and he said, why did you not say this until I asked? And I said, there is a reason why everybody's presenting, but this is my take on it. And he was like, I'm so glad you spoke. If we don't understand what we're building for, which is people like you, at that time I was all of 25, people like you will never win in the marketplace. And I think that left such a deep impression on the way I lead my teams today, or how I would recommend people to lead their teams today.
Yeah, it's also about having that inclusive, diverse perspectives, when the important decisions are made, right? And having diverse people in the room. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Divya. Thank you for being with us today. Really loved the answers to the questions. Love that we kept it also interactive.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so
absolutely.
So glad
it was our pleasure. And looking forward to seeing you at
Thank you very
our
much.
future events. Bye.